adventure will begin at our daughter Annette's house at Lapine, Oregon. This is her vacation home, and we stayed there overnight just to get a jump on getting out early in the morning. We leave the pine forests of Lapine now. We trade the pine forest for the wide open sagebrush flats of Central Oregon. The next thing we know, we look ahead, and here stand the snow-capped Steens Mountains, standing tall and looking good in the background. We go down the well-maintained Highway 78 for a while, and then pretty soon we turn to the right on Whitehorse Ranch Road, which is an unpaved road, but a pretty good one. We stop on top of the hill and look out across the sagebrush flat, and we see a small playa in the foreground, and then in the background a larger playa. And this is Coyote Lake, where our daughter's property is, where we'll be setting up the teepee later on. A cloud of dust follows us as we go down Whitehorse Ranch Road, and then past the old historical Whitehorse Ranch. All these ranchers are extremely proud of their brands and have them displayed up above their gate post as you enter the ranch. The well-weathered sign says, Camp C.F. Smith began May 1866 to protect Oregon's Central Military Road. Abandoned May 9, 1869, then ranched by John S. Devine, become part of the Miller and Lux cattle empire in 1887. From the ranch, we push on till we come to the Willow Creek Hot Springs, where we'll set up our camp for tonight. Since we don't have the teepee with us, we'll set the teepee up later, and then we'll use the teepee. But for right now, we'll just use the free campground at Whitehorse Hot Springs or Willow Creek Hot Springs. There are numerous beaver dams on Willow Creek. It's just a series of dams most of the way down, and so there's a lot of waterfowl around. We see the Canadian geese landing and taking out amongst the sagebrush. We go past a raven's nest clung high on the cliff above. Then we reach the area where the Sunstones are, and the sun's shining good today, and we see them glistening in the sunshine, just a little crystal. And wow, are they nice. My wife gathers them up and sends them off to an island in the Indian Ocean called Sri Lanka, and has them faceted into diamond-shaped jewelry, which she really enjoys. And the freezing probably helps bring them up too. Marge is really hunting them. We have trouble getting her stopped sometimes. But wow, look what beauties she's finding. An old jackrabbit is lurking in the sagebrush. He looks like he's got his nose turned sniffing, and I think he's probably got plans of having some babies here, because he doesn't seem to be interested in hopping away. And this is the black-tailed jackrabbit, which we have mainly in Central and Southern Oregon. We're trying to be just as polite and as considerate as we can of this jackrabbit. I don't think it's an easy place to live out here in the desert, where the eating isn't that good, particularly when it dries up in the fall. And so we just let him sneak away, and we go the other way, so we disturb him the minimum amount. These jackrabbits don't even dig dens. They just live under the sagebrush, and he's back in his favorite nest. Next, we see a horned lizard. He's sitting here just to keep the ant population down. Area, we move on up to where we see little flakes of agate all over the ground and great huge chunks of agate buried in the dirt. These are thought to be complete replacement cast agates where a tree once grew and then agate material flowed in. But I don't think that's entirely accurate. I'm sure some of them seem to be that way, but others aren't. Anyway, they're pretty good agate material, so we'll gather just a few of them. We don't want to get carried away on them because they're not exceptional grade stuff, but still they're pretty nice. And so it's petrified wood where the stick went through them, and you can cut that and have a really pretty design. Marge is looking them all over just to make sure she picks up the right one and just to see what they look like. We get back to our camp at Whitehorse Hot Springs, the Owyhee Canyon. We're going down to Leslie Gulch, which is over 2,000 feet lower in elevation than where we were, so it should be pretty good down there. A few of the antelope roam freely in the sagebrush and bunchgrass flats above Whitehorse. Here to move cattle. If you sign on a ranch job, it's just when it's time to move the cattle, it's time to move the bawling cattle onto a different range, and they'll be putting them on their summer pasture pretty soon. They're movable. You just put on a raincoat if you're a cowboy, climb in the saddle, and get to chasing those cattle. Cowboys, cows, dogs, and horses. We're starting to see some wild flowers in bloom alongside the road in spite of the rain. We'll keep a sharp eye out. Scenery is outstanding as our windshield wipers work overtime to keep the rain off the windows as we wind our way right down into the bottom of Leslie Gulch. Around one curve after another, and you never really know what you're going to see when you go around the curves as we wind deeper and deeper into this special select one of the free campsites with a cover over it even. It works well for rain, and also it's probably for sunshine because that sunshine can hit down here with a vengeance. We go down to water's edge at Owyhee Reservoir and see an osprey circling over the water looking for a fish. Sometimes he'll stall and almost look as if he's standing still watching the water. Then he'll suddenly dive down and come back up with a nice fish for his dinner. But right now, he's just looking, and the light's getting a little bit low, so we can't see him all the time. But he'll get his fish here sooner or later. And so we're going to break out some fish poles here just as soon as we can and test the water ourselves and see if we can catch a fish. And it looks like Marge is first to crank in a fish from the murky waters of Owyhee Reservoir. But wait a minute, that was just an old carp. We'll turn him loose since we don't eat them too much. And we're after the crappie, which we think are absolutely the top fish for eating. And so we just throw a little crappie jig out there, let it sink a little, and then slowly bring it towards shore. And they were biting and biting good. So we caught all the crappie we could possibly want. Time after time we'd throw out there and catch a crappie till our bucket looked as if it was almost full of them. Wow, what fishing! And those aren't little crappie, they're nice big meaty ones. They'll be really good for eating, except this one's wound around Marge's drawstring for her coat. But she'll get it unwound and put the crappie in the bucket and go back for another and another and another. The rain has almost completely stopped, but it's still cloudy and chilly, so we've got to stop here pretty soon because these all have to be filleted out tonight. And it looks like probably I'm the one that's elected to do the filleting of them, so I better get on with it and get started before it's dark. And so I worked as fast as I could work for one fish right after another till it got so dark if we'd had one more, I wouldn't have been able to get him filleted. But I was able to get them all filleted before dark. So we're going to have a feast for days on end, it looks like. And there's nothing better than these crappie. I keep watching the meat build up in the pan with the meat, and then sometimes I try to count the fish left in the bucket to do. And I was doing this and watching the sun slowly settle down behind some of the pillars of the Hawaii country down here in the bottom of Leslie Gulch. And what a scenic place. I watched the sun slowly sink down till it was completely out of sight, and it was just so dark that I couldn't even see to do one more fish. But when I got done, they had a nice warm dinner cooked for me and some hot water. Never stopped to explore them yet, but we decided to this time. The only thing we found in them was this petition with Leslie Gulch, and you can camp here for free, and they've got outhouses where you can go to the bathroom, and even a few arrowleaf balsa root in bloom down here. But the reason we come here was to hunt thunder eggs. That's Oregon State stone. And so we'll get up the next morning and go out and see what we can find in the way of. There's a slightly bent pillar here reaching toward the sky, but what a sight. And then I found an area that was reserved for rare plants. You're not supposed to go in there. So I didn't. I just took pictures from outside the fence. But I couldn't tell if any of those were rare or exotic or anything. Maybe they're not even up yet. These little fairy rings all over the place. That's little fairy rings of some kind of mushrooms. And we just saw numerous bunches of these. The mushrooms spread their spore out, and they won't grow on the same soil they grew on the year before. So they just grow these caves that were here. But if they had to, they could have. But probably their food and stuff wasn't there. I expect they like to be down near Sucker Creek or the Hawaii River or someplace where they could get a lot of things to eat, like freshwater mussels and different things. So we come back up out of this gorge, and it's just being smart enough that I knew if I burn them a little bit, then Marge would take over. So we've got a real woman to do the woman's work here, and that's a good thing. And wow, they're looking so good. After we had our feast of crappie, cooked very nicely by Marge, then I had to go. And so I went up on top of the mountain at Sucker Creek and looked around, and I actually found a spot up here where there were big thunder eggs, great huge one. I brought one back and cut it in half, and it was nice inside. Then we head back to White Horse Hot Springs, and I have to go check Annette's property and see if it's dry enough we can put the teepee up pretty soon. And So we camp at White Horse Hot Springs again. I walk up to the beaver pond, the last light of day, and here's an old coot dabbling around in the pond, getting him some of the vegetation he likes to eat right in the beaver pond. And then there's the beaver house here. And so the beavers are swimming all around in the pond, out gathering food and doing maintenance work on the pond and things that they think needed to be done. And I just can't get enough watching those beaver. That big tail works good for propelling, and they can turn it sideways and make a rudder out of it when they want. And there was one beaver, there was an old goose liked to stand up on top of the beaver house and do his goose noises. And so then it must have been pretty noisy for the beaver. And I noticed this one beaver was up on top of the beaver house inspecting it to see if the goose had messed it up or whatever, or maybe it was leaking, or maybe he wanted to put more mud on it to insulate it so the goose didn't wake the baby beaver up. The beaver house so they have to, there he jumped off the beaver house right then. And they jump in the water and they have to access them from underwater. And there's a couple layers. The lower level of it is for storing food and things like that. And then there's an upper level which is nice and dry for raising baby beaver. And so this guy, they'll always go underwater about 10 or 20 feet before they get to the dam because they have to go underwater anyway to come up in there. After spending a very pleasant evening watching the sun sink down below the Steens Mountains, the next morning we decide to get up early and go down to the Petrified wood place and see if we can find some of that super good petrified wood. It's called McDermott wood because it's near the town of McDermott, Nevada. And then you go into Nevada and come back into Oregon. And so we get down to where we can sort of see the area where the wood, petrified wood is, and it looks like it might be covered in snow. But we're going to go see anyway, and also there's a creek we have to ford. And with all that snow melting off, we're kind of concerned that it might be difficult to ford the creek. Marge gets out, takes a few pictures, tries the gate, and says she can't get it. So I've got to go get the gate for her. She's going to give up on it here any second. And so I'll get the gate, and then we'll go on down and see if we can get across the creek. She's looking at the leverage that you use to work on the gate, but it's just too tough a gate. That's for tough cowboys. Then we go through the gate. We wind down a little 2-track road till we come to the creek crossing, past a mud hole, and then we stop and look at the creek. Marge says there's no way you're going to be able to cross that creek. And I said, oh, it doesn't look that bad. Let's give it a try. And so I got in and gave it a try, and it was really quite easy. The trick is to go across these creeks quite slow, and then you don't splash the water up on your motor. So we went across there with absolutely no problem. And then up the hill on the other side, and this road, they've run their cattle across this road when it was really wet. So there's a whole bunch of cow tracks that make it real rough. They're in the mud, and then they've dried enough that it was really rough. Then we go up a little sagebrush-covered hill and wander up past an old vacant ranch that probably they have. Then up on the hill, we and head up for these low hills. And there's a real neat little butte off to the left that's very distinct, and you can tell it for a long ways off. And it looks like the snow level's pretty low, but it looks like by now we might be able to, that the snow level might be just above where we dig for the wood. And here's a gate that's super tight, but we got through the gate and we get up to see some of the diggings. And this is our favorite spot to dig. And this is there's about 4 foot of overburden over the top of the wood, and it's in a real nice sandy loam topsoil. And so when the moisture came in the winter, it caved in on the hole. But it didn't take long to shovel that nice dirt out. And there's some of the petrified wood that we found right down in the bottom of the hole. Some really neat stuff, and it's in a few different colors. And this stuff is all gem quality petrified wood. So we didn't have to dig a whole long time, and you're only allowed 20 pounds per person. We may not have got quite that much, but we didn't want to get over our limit. We had a scale along, but Marge said, well, we don't have over our limit. We don't need to weigh it right now. But we got plenty of it, whatever it weighed. And you dig a little while, and then you have to move some of the dirt that's caved down in it and some of the dirt off the top of it. And then I just take a bar or something and probe down there, and you can hear that wood ring. It's just really hard and nice. And we'll look at it, and you can see the shape of different limbs and trees. I haven't found out what kind of wood it was that fell here that was petrified, but it must have been like shrubs, because we're not finding anything very big here. It's more like smaller stuff, like some kind of shrubs. So we're going to gather up all of our petrified wood and get in the car and head out. And Marge decided she would drive, since I have to mess with the gates. So she messes around a while, turning around, and then we're off and at it as we move out. And we only dug a few hours here, if maybe an hour or two, and got all the wood we wanted. So that was really good, and it's super good quality stuff. We move off on top of the hill, and then we'll go through the gates and ford the creek again. I've always liked the looks of these little buttes, and particularly that little round one standing alone, and they're particularly nice with the snow on them now against a clear blue sky with a few cotton candy clouds. Then we move down to start getting near the creek. We go down the steep hill down to where we see the willows below, and that's where the creek is. And then we turn. When we turn a little bit, then we'll be able to see the creek ahead of us. Marge is still driving and doing all right. Then she finds the creek. I had to use all the nice words I could think of, and even a few words that weren't too nice. She balked when she saw that creek, just like an old mare that wouldn't cross a creek. But after talking with her for quite a while, I finally convinced her to ease up and go through the creek. I finally convinced her to just go for it and go through the creek. She wasn't wanting to very bad, but she finally did it, and we got through the creek with no trouble, although she was going faster than she should have, but it was still okay. We get in the water, go on across the creek, She made quite a few waves when she hit that creek. And then we realized something. We've got a flat tire. We always carry 2 spares with us, so when that flat tire happens, we can just change it and go on. We're heading on up on the White Horse Ranch Road, right across from where Annette's property is, and we see a wild stallion just making his way across the desert, free and wild. And then we go on a little farther, and we see more wild horses out in the desert, just enjoying the nice green grass that might be coming up. There are 3 more out grazing away on the desert area. By now, the keeper of the stars is putting the sun away for the evening. What a sight. That's what I love about the desert. There are always great sunrises and sunsets. After that wonderful sunset, it was a nice clear night, so we slept real good. But I still have one more job to do. I've got to go out to Annette's place. I'm going to take the Honda out there and see if the road's dry enough that we can get out there to set the teepee up. It's getting time of year. We need to do that. There's some pretty deep ruts in the road, but surprising enough, the road is nice and dry all the way out there, and there's no water setting on her property. So I buzz out there to really good breakneck speed. You can go faster on this machine than you can drive a vehicle out there. I stop on her place, take a look at the Steens Mountains standing tall in the background, and I see our fencing material that those boys were supposed to put up last summer is still laying there. I guess I got to get on their cases. There's a badger den on the upper part of her property. No badger seemed to be there, but then I found a baby kangaroo rat hopping around. He better go stick his hole in a head, or some predator's going to have him for dinner. He's all furred out and able to hop good. Then I go out and take a look at Coyote Lake with the Steens Mountains shining on the water in the foreground. And normally this is a dry lake bed, but this year it's completely full of water, and the wave action has been working on the shoreline. Then I see a fin off from a World War II bomb. They used this area for bombing practice during the war, and there's still a fin there laying in the calm waters of Coyote Lake. I have to head back to our campsite, and we're going to start packing today and leaving tomorrow for home. So I'll get back there and we'll take some pictures of the petrified wood that we found out in the Petrified Wood place, a gem quality wood. Then I go past the old military road and on. That was a road that crossed the road that accesses Annette's property, and it was for Indian fighting. I lay the petrified wood out on the picnic table, and there looks like a petrified bong. It must have been a caveman's bong. And then we looked at the really nice petrified wood, all different colors of it with some really nice grain in it, and it's just exceptional. It's the best, pretty much the best found any place. There's some that even have what looks to be little knots, and that you can see where the bark was on it. Just some really, really nice stuff. Then I go through the pile and look some more. Some of the blacker stuff was what they call swamp wood. And then there's some things that look like root balls off from a shrub. I found a couple of them. They're very nice. I'm anxious to cut them and see what they look like inside. Or maybe I'll keep them for specimens. They're pretty nice. And then here's a piece of what they call swamp wood. That wood is dark and has a dark center. And this one is multicolored. That'll be really nice for making jewelry. So we're getting ready to gather up and head on home.